No, I put this on our YouTube channel and it's awesome for people. So.
Yeah. Well, welcome. And without further ado, I will hand it over to you all. Please.
Hello, welcome to the second of four events that we're throwing this year. These are hosted by CCA MFA Writing in solidarity in partnership with grad admissions at CCA. This is a series of conversations around professional development topics, and we have today Molly Prentiss and Professor Tom Barbash, who are going to be in conversation about one of the probably the most special aspects of the program at CCA, which is mentored studies, but just talking more broadly about mentorship and what does it mean to have a mentor? How do you even find one? How do you work with one productively? I mean, we all maybe dream of having a mentor, and here are two people who have been, working together in this way for many years now. They met at CCA when Molly was taking a class with Tom, and years on, through extraordinary triumphs by the two of them, they've continued to be in touch. I won't enumerate Tom and Molly's many accomplishments, but just so you know, Tom is a beloved and longtime member of our faculty at CCA MFA. And his most recent book is Dakota Winters. He's a wonderful colleague, terrific professor, and wonderful mentor. So super glad that Tom is here. And then Molly Prentiss, our alum, is now, I think, 10 years out from the program, but is the author now of two books, even more longer. So she's the author now of two books, both of which have received heaps of praise, very justifiably so. And we're just so glad to host her back and to get this chance to hear her in conversation with Tom Barbash. So welcome, Tom. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much, Jasmine and Jeff. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. And great to see you, Molly. And
so nice to see you, Tom. It's
congratulations on this beautiful and wonderful book. So
thank you.
People have to understand that what a joy it is when you are a professor and you first read your student's application and get excited about it, and you look way back when, this moment when you get this book, this finished product of all the hard work and talent and chops, of a student that you believed in correctly. But
jump in and say back at you, because it's like the relationship is so mutual, and that when you see your professor's work get published and you see them succeed, it's also really fun. So yeah, it's just been so awesome to have that relationship that goes on forever after the program.
Yeah, and also that we are both New York writers too. So yeah. Living, like who work together in California. And so, the things that one of the things I wanted to talk about, I try to say, and I think of you, I think of a few other students, but very much of you, of what I think the approach we take and that I like to take is a kind of holistic approach, that when it's not that you're just doing work on the manuscript, you're taking someone who's raw when they come, they've got some talent and a desire to write. And then there's so much that goes on. There's meeting together, trying to get the right books in front of your student at the right time, having them throw ideas at you, sort of developing their ability as a critic in workshop. Molly was my TA, but there's so much that goes into the process, and then we can talk in separate. I was thinking about the way you broke your book up into separate parts. That's almost like what the relationship of mentor and student writer is, because then there was after workshop when I have my ear out for fellowships for you and try to get you to go to places like Aspen, and others. But there's all that goes into it. But one thing, it's so funny when people think, oh well, all this great luck has happened to Molly. Molly, you were the hardest worker I think you just, all you did was work. All you do, if you were reading, and if you weren't reading, you were writing. I know how hard you worked, and I think I saw a lot of myself in you, and that was my approach in grad school. And then it's just like sometimes you wonder if what you're saying is falling on deaf ears, I mean, but with you, there's a way in which you always listened, in a way that you just absorbed and took things in, that I just couldn't imagine that this wasn't going to work out for you. But, I'm wondering, because the people that'll be watching this, a lot of people are thinking about graduate school. Take us a little bit from that moment you found out you got into the program to developing that kind of a positive at work approach and attitude that not everyone has it, and I also, by the way, I just want to say is I think a lot of people in your year did in some ways because of you, and some of your, like Lisa and Simon, that whole first workshop, you guys were working hard. But if you could just talk a little bit about, I don't know, how you got into that space that allowed you to get so much out of the program.
Yeah. Well, I think you were the one who called me and told me.
I did. I called your dad first.
And, yeah, you called me Dad. And I was actually traveling I was traveling for a year in South America, and I think I was in Peru when you called. Yeah. And it was the coolest phone call to be in like a little telephone booth in Peru, getting this call that I got into CCA. Which was the only school that I applied to, the only graduate school I applied to. And that's because I was really particular about wanting to go to a graduate school that also had other art programs going on. I've always been very interested in art. I am an illustrator, and I like to paint, and I love being around artists. I love conversations with artists. And so I thought, and very rightly, that CCA would be a place to inform me in the way that I wanted to be informed, and to inform my work in that way, like just infuse it with all the art of all kinds. So I got that call. I flew back from Peru. And then when I got to CCA, it was as if grad school allowed me to like turn the switch on and decide. I mean, it's partly like you're making this commitment, this financial commitment, this like life commitment, this time commitment. I moved to San Francisco for school, and I decided, like, during these 2 years, I'm going to become a writer. And I was really, really raw at that point, like you said, really unformed in how I wanted to approach writing, what I even wanted to write about. And so it was a really good time for me to sort of sponge up everything that CCA had to offer. And I mean, I could go on and on about the ways in which that program informed both my first book and my writing life and everything. But in terms of the mentorship, which was a crucial part of what the school gave me, it was one of those kind of things that you didn't even know you needed until you got it. And until you had it later, even after you out of the program, it's like, I didn't know I needed that. And so many things like that came out of CCA. Like, I didn't know that I needed, I didn't know I needed these one-on-one meetings with professors. I didn't know I would need later a letter of recommendation. I didn't even think about that. I didn't know I would need someone to blurb my book when it came out. I didn't know I needed someone to put me up for fellowships and that I wouldn't just apply for them myself. All of those things came out of these relationships that I made there. And yeah, it was kind of this gift that I didn't even know I would get out of the program.
Yeah. But how about the sort of the seriousness with which you took it? Did you find, and I don't know, I mean, I have a feeling there were some who were similarly had a similar attitude. What was your sense of the people around you? Were people as serious as, or how, and how did you grasp the fact that you didn't want to waste time? Was it that you'd had a few years after school? Like what about it, made you?
A few things. I'm a serious person. I mean, I'm just like I sort of like have an ambitious core, which has waxed and waned over as I've gotten more responsibility with like having children and doing all the other things in life. But at that moment in my life, in my 20s, I had just a deep, deep ambition, and whatever I did, I wanted to do it really well. And I also was blessed with this amazing gift of having parents who were creatives. My father is a painter and my mother is a radio producer. and a storyteller, and they took, like, I saw them, I watched them through their life, like, take art seriously and take creative practice seriously. It's their job. Like, and I sort of knew from a very young age that I wanted a job like that. And that I wanted to make I wanted to take creativity as seriously as like any job that would pay me money. And I always have. I mean, no matter how many side jobs I've had or different money-making careers I've had on the side, like I take writing very seriously, and I take creative practice really seriously. And I think this is something you helped me with too, Tom, is like, I feel like you instilled in your class, in your students, this rigor, this aspect of rigor and daily work. And I mean, I think you said 3 hours a day was recommended, which I feel like is the perfect number of hours per day.
Yeah.
Just a side note. I feel like anything over 3 and you start writing gibberish, and anything under 3 and you don't get deep enough. And so I feel like that's a really great thing that you gave us, is like the idea to give yourself this practice. And, you know, of course there's some months and years which I fall off and I'm not able to do that. But I've developed, because of that early rigor, I've developed this like trust that I will return to that practice, and I will always have that. If I'm bored, I will have writing. Like I love that. That's like why I started writing, I think, because when I was traveling for a year in South America, like I was often sort of like bored and wandering around and at a coffee shop, and I found that writing could always keep me not bored and not lonely. And so I just always have turned to it as like the place that I go if I want to figure something out, if I feel a certain way and want to like suss it out on the page, or so yeah, it's given me, that's such a true gift to have that for your whole life, is like a place to turn when you feel bored or lonely.
Yeah, I think it works. I was thinking a couple things, and one thing I was thinking about is that, and this will, it's something that will be passed on through generations of teaching. I am a product of my mentors too, you know, as is Jasmine, so my first, you know, writing teachers were when I was a newspaper reporter, and I got into a workshop with Tobias Wolff and Doug Unger, and they were very different mentors, but they are friends to this day and very important to my life and people that I turn to. And you probably remember how many times I mentioned something that Frank Conroy, you know, had taught me, you know, and so those things get passed on to you, and then I know that you've worked with different writers, you know, at different capacities, you've taught, and then you pass that on to them. I also, you know, I was thinking about that idea, how you know, what writing does for you. And what's been interesting, the many things that's interesting about your work, is how your projects have evolved from what you thought they'd be. You know, I mean, with Tuesday Nights, beginning with what that book was originally, you know, and then how, you know, what it became, and then with Old Flame too, you know, how much the things that were happening in your life, there's so many things that are like, oh my God, I bet that happened to you. And I was even like thinking of this, right, this thing with Renata is talking, and she says here, where was I this whole time? I was at home with the babies, warming up their milk, trying to steel myself for when they were asleep. But I swear to God, they knew when I opened a book, Emily. As soon as I opened a book, their little eyes would pop open as if they could sense I was trying to use my brain for something other than making their shits on a chart. And I was like, oh my God, I could just see Molly, mother, at home trying to get a, you know, yeah.
What I'm currently going through. I have a 4-month-old, so I'm like, when I open a book, her little eyes pop open, and it's every single time. They know when you're trying to pull one over on them and get some intellectual activity going. So but yeah, I mean, so much of that book is really personal. And an amazing lesson that I learned from the publication of that book and getting to that place was that, I mean, this is just sort of like a boost story for any aspiring writer out there. Like that book, the first draft of that book which was an entirely different book, was completely rejected by my publisher. Utterly, like, it was a completely failed manuscript. And I had to start from scratch. I had a 2-book deal and I had to start completely from scratch, and create an entire new manuscript. And Old Flame was a project that I had like sitting in the back corners of my computer, that was like my private, it was like my private like essay that I was working on. And I thought it would never see the light of day, or if it did, it would be with a small press. And when I was desperate, and my agent was like, do you have anything else that we can show your publisher? And I showed her the draft of this, and she was like, I love it. This is the book, we're doing it. And so that is like when your secret projects or your like passion projects like become the project, that's like when you know that like writing from a place of authenticity is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And and I think a big lesson that came out from that too was that writing, just like writing to write a book, like won't work. I mean, it can work if you like push it really hard forever, but like it, to me, I had to be guided to like what that story was going to be. And I had to find it in my own experience. And yeah, so
And it
yes,
seems to me that it's nice because if the book explores a lot of issues of business or pleasure or art, and how life gets in the way of art. And then this was that, no, it as an artist, you have to bring that artist brain into life and find, so this thing with the motherhood and all the ways in which it can get in the way of a novelist's life is what ended up fueling this terrific novel, so
yeah, totally. Like sometimes the work is the life, and sometimes the life is the work. Like sometimes like your life will give you your subject, and then sometimes you have to like rearrange your life in order to do the work. So it's like both things fuel each other.
Yeah. But don't you think like when students, to bring it back to grad school, when people are in grad school, and that's one thing is there are certain things that they think they should be writing. They're not yet sure who they are as writers, how much they should take from life versus their favorite author. They just read something. How much influence should you allow in there? That way of finding, when you say, finding your authentic self, it's hard for people to, all through life, to do that. But certainly as a new writer, right? Is that's something, you
Totally.
recall? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember just like everything I read and loved, I wanted to try it on for size, I would like read something and be infatuated with the style, and then I would want to like copy it and try it. And like, you know what? That's the coolest thing you can do. And you can try on all these different voices and all these different styles. And what I found was that the more I it's almost like an actor who's able to embody multiple roles, and through those roles can find themselves as an actor. It's like it's the same principle. I actually think that the more reading material that was given to me and that I loved and that I was able to learn from and try to emulate, the more I was able to adopt those styles and like shift them into my own and add them into. It's like
Totally. And Molly, I have to say that because I remember also because you were my TA, too. So I almost know as much about how you read as how you write, from your experience in grad school, because and I'd say an offhand thing in class and you'd have read it, by the next week, usually, it's just, you took in suggestions, you read, and you took what you needed from each thing. I mean, how many books did you read when you were doing your MFA? You must have,
so many.
Yeah.
I wish I could still read that many all the time. But that is the gift of grad school too, right? Is like this really concentrated period. I mean, it gives you the practice to keep that going in your life, but it also, for that time, it allows you this really concentrated kind of time and space where you can really kind of absorb everything.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, I think just before I forget to say this, I think that with the mentors I had at CCA, especially you, but also, I mean, a few others were really helpful in this aspect. There's the writing itself and the creative practice. And then there's also the professional kind of toolkit that the mentors can kind of provide for you after you get out of school. And it's like, you don't know, again, you don't know you're going to need these things, right? Like as soon as I got out from CCA, I was like, oh, what do I do? I need to apply for a residency. You need 2 letters of recommendation. Where do you get those? I mean, some of my friends who didn't go to grad school or didn't have a mentor that they could really turn to, even my friends who were in the art programs, didn't necessarily have one-on-one mentorship people in the same way, where they were able to go to people and ask specifically for these things that you need for later in your writing career. So like letters of recommendation is huge. Even like ideas for places to place your work. I would often ask people like, where do you think I could place this story? And, my mentors would say like here and here. I've even had Miranda Mellis was one of my other mentors, and she even went to a literary journal with someone that she was friends with on the editorial staff there, and was like, I have this story by a student, I think it would fit with you. And I mean, that does not happen. I didn't get in that magazine, but they said no. But it's still the fact that there was someone who is batting for me out in the real literary world, like that's not something you come by without having this kind of mentorship.
But there's 2 parts, and it's the thing that we love doing most. Like Joe Holsworth is someone who just graduated a couple of years ago, who was in the 82nd Airborne in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan fell. And I said, you need to write an editorial. And then he said, well, by when? I said, in the next 3 hours. And I got out and I contacted editorial editors at 3 newspapers. And within 3 hours, he'd finished it and he'd placed it in the Chronicle, and then he had like 8 pieces in the Chronicle after that. And I jumped for joy, I mean, it's like, oh my God, and I'm sure, knowing you, I bet you've done that for writers already, open doors for them.
Yeah, I mean, I gave the gift you gave me with Aspen, that Aspen Summer Words program. For those of you that don't know it, you should look it up.
By the way, it wasn't a gift. Molly had to earn her way through her work. The recommendation helped, but it only helps if you've got the stuff. So, but go on.
I didn't know about the fellowship until Tom put me up for it. So that was the help, is like that you put me up for it. And I have done the same for multiple mentees of mine. So students or people that I mentor one-on-one, and one of them got in last year.
That's fantastic. And
I was like paying it forward, and that felt almost as good as getting the fellowship myself. So it is really like a gift that keeps on giving.
Totally. So one of the things that you're uniquely positioned to do, especially we have, along with perspectives, we have some of our current students, is there's the thrill of going to grad school, having hopefully mentors you connect with, having that great last night where you read to everybody, and then you have to go and make a living, and maybe you have some successes and some fellowships, but there've been some downtimes, some challenges for you in terms of, so how do you keep your spirits up in general? And part of that is keeping in touch with your community, that you left in grad school, but you don't have that constant day to day. So, how did you move from this nurturing 2 years of, environment to creating a sustainable life, as an artist, living in a place that's as difficult to do that in as New York? So,
yeah, I mean, that's such a good question, because it's like the thing that separates those that get published and those that don't, I think, is like the ability to keep on trucking when it's really hard, because it's almost always really hard. But the thing that I now know in hindsight is that like the work is the fun part. And I didn't really know that until I got published. And that was really hard. And I mean, of course, it's so wonderful to be published, and that's the goal. And you want people to read your work. And there's a whole set of things that come along with that that's really nerve-wracking, and you have to learn all these new skills about public speaking and promotion. And
we talked about that too. I remember, like, it was one was getting your book, and then I was like, okay, let's talk about your book's going to come out. There's a whole new set of anxieties that settle in, right? So,
and that's another place when I leaned back on you guys is I, like, what should my tour look like? What should I take this book deal? Should I, like, I called you and Danielle Alarcon on the day when I was going through my book deal negotiations, and both of you guys were able to provide really helpful feedback on like which house I should go with and all of that. So that's another point at which I turned to past mentors. But yeah, in terms of like when I hit bumps in the road or down lulls in my practice, or times in my life during which I just am, blocked or unable to write, or rejection comes on full force and you get super down. I mean, I've had all those things happen, as I'm sure you have too, as every single writer has, Jonathan Franzen has.
yeah.
Everyone who's doing this has gone through all of that before. But like I said, like, I think a couple things that I kind of turn to now that I've had the experience with that so much is the point of it is the practice. Like I always come back to that. Like the point of the work is the work, and that's where the joy happens for me, and that's where the revelations happen, and that's where it's interesting, like screw the market. Like that, like it's boring. The market is boring. But what's interesting is doing the work and figuring out new ways to get better and new ways to develop, and new people to connect with in the book world. And all those things are for me where the joy lies. So I try to remember that in times of trouble. And then also, let's see, also that developing a self-trust, I think, in knowing that, like, becoming solid in the fact that I am a writer. Before I came to grad school, I never would have called myself a writer. That also is one of the gifts that it gave me, is like, I'm in writing school, I'm a writer now. And that actually really helped to kind of have that be like a way that I described myself. And now I have this foundational kind of trust that I will always have this practice and I will return to it. And I even, like, right now, I mean, I haven't written since my baby was born. Actually, I wrote for 15 minutes at 6:15 a.m. a couple of days ago, and that was really awesome. And I wrote a really good paragraph. But I know that it's waiting for me, and I know that there's more to come. And I know that there are block phases, there's whole seasons of life where writing doesn't happen, or it can't happen, or it's bad. There are whole seasons of life where it's bad. There's whole books, there's whole manuscripts inside me that are bad. And that's okay. That's part of like what gets you to the good ones. And yeah, that trust it just takes time.
I was wondering if you could talk, I'm wondering if you remember it as fondly as I do, but that your first workshop, we had in a small group because we had 2 fiction workshops at that time, but we had about 8 students, and you guys were so into each other and into the work. You remember that group? Can you talk about when a workshop really coheres, and you probably hadn't been in a group like that, but what it's like, when you step into it, I mean, all Chazelle, Christine, it was just a really talented and kind group. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's so magic when that happens. And I think one of my biggest pieces of advice while you're in grad school is to like really lock down those relationships, because
yes, and you did. Yeah.
Another thing you don't know is that when you are you don't know when you're in it. Like, you kind of think that like everyone's always going to want to read your writing because you get in this, you're in this situation where everyone's doing the same thing and working on the same project of learning to be a writer and of trying to publish work. And when you get out of grad school, like, you need those people and you need that community to be able to turn to when you need someone to look at a piece, or you need, I have actually hired people, I've paid people from grad school, friends, to read full manuscripts, because which I actually highly recommend. I think there's something, it doesn't have to be a lot, but like a gesture toward compensation is like a very cool way to enlist help in a way that's serious. I think if you want I've often given my manuscripts to friends and not had it be a transactional arrangement, and they take 6 months to read it, or they only read part, or they don't give critical feedback, or that, they don't take it seriously. But if you put a transaction in there, it really makes it so like they take it as seriously as you do.
Mhm.
And but yeah, that's all to say, those were people that I found in that workshop and in other workshops that were similarly cohesive. And we have that, like, really holding on to those relationships and nurturing them. I mean, it takes work to keep up with those people and offer to read their work. And
Yes, yeah. Because I always say that to students. I was like, I mean, well, you want to do it just because you're devoted to the project of grad school, in your community. But if you take that job as a critic seriously, you're going to get it back, tenfold. And you do, as you said, if you find a good readers, you take them out for drinks, do whatever, you cultivate that. It's going to be so important for you. That's where you find your peeps, right? Is at those times and those
Totally.
situations. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are still my go-to readers,
That's fantastic. That's great. So you're keeping in touch with
yeah,
folks.
with a few of them for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was an awesome workshop.
Yeah, no, it was
I really miss having that space, but the other thing is that you can take that recipe and you can create it in post grad school life.
Yeah.
I've had various stages in which I've had writing groups or workshops, or I've led workshops, which is equally as fulfilling and sort of enriching for my own practice as it is as like a teaching opportunity. But I've often recreated, using the kind of magic recipe of workshop, those spaces in which you can have those dialogues in which you're just keeping that switch turned on. And I think that the times when I have that is when I'm at my best.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could talk too, since we're talking about what we do at CCA, is about your TA experience, because you were a really good TA and you got amazing comments from the students back. But for the two of us, I think what was nice about it is, I mean, I was your professor, but we were kind of peers when you were my TA. We were both sort of teaching the class. I mean, I was teaching it, but anytime you wanted to jump in and I think you also you did a couple craft talks, if I remember, but that experience of because I don't know if you'd had much teaching experience before, but you clearly liked it, when you did it. And I think you got a lot of it. Yeah.
I love teaching, and it was so amazing to be able to practice that and like try it on for size while I was in school. And yes, I think it was also just amazing that you kind of gave me the opportunity to actually, I mean, in a lot of TA-ships, you just kind of sit there and you grade the papers or whatever, and this was a much more hands-on, like you said, like it felt like a partnership.
Yeah.
And I found that very valuable, and I've used it on every resume I've ever sent out.
Well, no, and the other thing that I was saying is
like
when
20 years ago.
yeah, but I can also talk about your teaching without wondering. I wonder what Molly would be like as a teacher. I know what you're like as a teacher from having see you do that. Also, as you read, I think Joyce Carol Oates has talked about this. There's nothing more intense than reading something you're about to teach, the way you have to grasp it, in order.
True.
So yeah.
No, I mean, teaching is just as valuable as being taught, I think, in when it comes to your own practice.
Yeah. So what can you say a little bit about, you talked a little bit about some of the anxieties going into publishing your first book, and then expectations based on the success of your first book for your second book, and the pressures. What sort of things for young writers can you know, who are wondering what it's like to try and sell their first book or selling their first book, what sort of things would you have liked to have known going into the process of going out into the marketplace, finding an agent, all that? But what's the best attitude to have, best way to sort of think about all this? So sorry, it's a very broad question.
No, it's good. I mean, I would say that like the first thing I did before could do anything else was get very thick-skinned about rejection. Very, like, to the point where I actively pretended that I didn't get rejected when I did. This was my method. A lot of people like post the rejections on their wall or whatever.
Yeah.
My method was delete the email from my inbox. That didn't happen. On to the next. I think also something I learned from I think it was you, or maybe it was, I think it was you, is to always have a certain number of things out in the world.
Yep, I definitely told, I mean, someone else might have told you that as well, but I did tell you that. Yeah.
There was 7 things out in the world. So, you know, I would, during grad school, I had like 7 short stories out in the world. I still have yet to get a short story published. Like I also learned in grad school that I'm not a short story writer, I'm a novelist. So thank you for that. But I think that what that did for me, sending all those short stories and getting the rejections, it made me very comfortable in that space, or uncomfortable enough to completely ignore it. Having it be not the thing that I didn't let it overcome me and stop me. And I think that is the only way you can approach this really intense world that is full of rejection, and also is full of kind of like luck and weird, you know, like networking and things that you can't really control. And so, like I said, like continuing to go back to the point of like, the work is the work is what matters. Your good work will rise to the top. Continue to do the work and send it out, hope for the best. Also know that like it's probably, if it happens, going to happen through putting yourself out there enough to have the connections that will make it happen. The way that I met my agent was through a fellowship in New York City, where we had editors come and talk to us every week. They had these Tuesday night meetings with people in your industry. And so the artists would meet with like gallerists, and the writers would meet with editors and agents. And I met with one editor who then passed my name on to another editor, who passed my name on to another agent, who said no to me, but then passed me to their aspiring agent mentee. And that aspiring agent mentee is the person who brought me in. And now she's like a powerhouse. She's like, you know, she is the agent for like, I don't know, probably like 80% of the young female novelists out there right now. And so like I grew with her, she grew with me. I went with like a young, hungry agent rather than like a seasoned, you know, heavy hitter, which that's a good piece of advice, because my agent worked with me for 5 years on my book before she even put it out to sell. So she actually edited.
That is so unusual, and
so
I mean,
unusual.
I think it is an amazing story, but very, very unusual.
Very unusual. But it was the biggest gift because yeah, sometimes editors don't even do that for you. Not to burst anybody's bubble. Good editors do, but yeah. So where was I in this winding story?
Well, we got a question just to add to the discussion.
Yeah.
So do you think it's useful to be actively thinking of publishing when in grad school? When, if ever, would you advise against it, is the question that just came in.
That's a great question. Yeah, always have I mean, for me, there was always a drive for that, but Lord, am I glad that what I wrote in grad school did not get published. Like,
That's interesting that people who like are so desperate to get published, the idea, and I agree with you. You know, that's true, that you're glad those things didn't get published.
oh, so glad. Like, just as I'm glad that my second manuscript that got rejected. I'm so glad.
Yeah.
And I think that that is another way to look at it, right? Is like, if I'm not getting published right out the gate, this is a gift, so that you don't have to go look back at your 25-year-old mumbo jumbo and be like, that's in the world, you know? So I think looking at things as they happen as gifts, rather than, I mean, of course, you guys also, I've cried in so many New York City elevators when, like, after like being told by my agent that I have to rewrite 200 pages or something, like all the hard things have also happened. So I'm not trying to say Pollyanna your way through this. There's
It happens all the way through, and you have to have the right attitude. In my last book, actually, I sold it to one editor, Lee Boudreau, and then Megan Lynch, another editor, took it over. And Megan had a very different bedside manner than my first editor, you know, and was super tough. And I got this letter, and it ended up being, you know, I at first I was like, oh my God, I guess it's done. I guess I'm done. You know, I guess this whole thing, but it was just incredibly helpful. And I just needed the space to sort of figure out how best to take it in. And it wasn't a letter from someone who was trying to take me down. It was from someone who really believed in the book, but also believed in order for it to be as good as it could be, that I needed to hear these things. And that's at my supposed level, you know, whatever it was, that I'd been out in publishing for a while. But
yeah,
it's still, and I also remember getting a story, and that one of the stories from the collection was in McSweeney's, and one of the editors had a lot of edits on the first thing, and I called a friend and said, just screw him. I'm not doing those. I was just, and he said, I hear you. Why don't you wait for the end of the weekend, and then if you still feel that way, then talk to him. And by the end of the weekend, I looked at it, and they were all good edits, and it was, but
yeah,
I'm the same person. And those edits looked terrible to me on Friday, and they looked really good on Sunday. Have you had that experience?
oh yeah. So every time, I mean, if someone is seeing something, you know, if an editor is seeing something, even if maybe their edit isn't the one you would do, like they are seeing that something is not right.
That's right. That's right.
What an amazing gift to have someone make your work better. Although it doesn't take away like the sting of first getting it and being like, like, how am I ever going to fix that?
Right.
You know, you just see the work ahead of you, and you see and you get indignant about, oh, I thought it was perfect, you know, but instead you get to redo it and make it better.
Yeah. So we have another question, which is how, and this is, and I think I talked to you guys a lot about this. So I have my feelings about it too. How do you know in the MFA context when feedback is good and when it's not? So when you're getting feedback from your classmates, I remember there were a couple students almost did, well, 6 people thought I should end it this way, and 8 people, like, you can't get into that, right? But how best to hear the sorts of things, you know, to sift through it for what can help you and what you can just let go. So
That's a good question too. Tom, what do you think about that?
well, I mean, I think that's part of finding your voice and finding out who you are, you know, and I also think you were onto something just before with the editor's notes. What I sometimes think is that the person is onto something where there's a problem, but there's prescription for how to fix it is off for you. So what the best way to hear criticism sometimes is, I know what you're saying, and there is an issue, but I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
And I also think that I've also had advice from really famous writers that that they were onto something, but I didn't take their advice, and it wasn't right for that story. I mean, I remember Marilyn Robinson, there's a name drop, telling me something very specific on a story, and she wasn't right for that story. She's right on 99.9% of humanity, but on that particular story, you know, I stuck by my guns and it was right. So so you have to also, I don't know, I mean there's a way of but how do you leave yourself open to what people have to say, and then
yeah, I kind of think that this is a little bit different, a kind of side answer, but I have this theory or this practice of of like, I used to be a really obsessive notebook taker, but then or notebook writer. But then when I had kids, it was really hard to keep a notebook and, just physically maintain the notebook. So I came up with this understanding that if the idea is good, it will come back to me. It will return. Like, even if I don't write it down right now,
Yeah.
the idea will return to me, and maybe it will be even better when it returns.
Yeah.
And so that kind of trust in like that the good idea will surface. And sometimes that needs like a little bit of time. So if you go to a workshop and one person's like, I think you should end it this way, and I think, I think she's too mean and she's not reliable enough, or she's too reliable, or and someone else like, no, I think that, it's all confusing, and it does actually feel quite confounding sometimes after you get out of workshop. And then I think if you like sit with it and you kind of let a few days pass and let what comes back to you from the workshop like resurface, that is often helpful, giving it a little space and seeing what rises to the top.
Absolutely. And that's why I often would do, as you know, like 4 days later, I'd get in touch with you, or we'd sit, in A2 or something. And I'd say like, well, what do you think about what happened in workshop? Like what that idea of coming back to you, like what's, now that you've had a few days to think about it, and usually go, I totally think now I have to, you'd sounded much more directed when you'd had some days, because it's overwhelming to sit there and just, hear all these different things.
I do think, like, to get a little more nitty gritty on it, I do think that like when there's a prescriptive bit of advice, it's often not right. Like if someone's saying like, this should happen in your story, like that is a very hard bit of advice for me to work toward. I mean, it's also because like I'm the kind of writer who I can't have an outline, or it will make me feel like stifled. So if someone tells me like, you should have the guy die in the end, and I'm trying to like work toward the guy dying in my writing, it will always fail. Like,
Totally. But what I would say, and maybe you agree with me, is you have to reject it and then pretend you came up with it. Like it has to come out of you organically. So you're like, no way he's going to die in the end. And then you have to be sitting there going, I think he dies in the end.
Yeah.
And then
it being your idea.
Yeah. I have an idea. So and I've done that a lot. I've like rejected a friend's advice and then later go, you know what has to happen?
Yeah.
So, yeah. What else? Oh, here, someone said, you mentioned organizing and leading your own workshops after grad school. How did you find people to join and how big were your groups? How did you recruit students?
Good question. Basically networking through various writers circles, past residencies I'd been to, or other people I knew who were writers, and then I would have them tell their friends. Just networking. When you're I was in New York City at the time when I was organizing my own workshops, and I just kind of started attending all the writerly events I could and plugging into all of the literary communities I could. And then I would just put the word out. I mean, all the ways you put the word out: social media, email lists. I even plastered flyers around Williamsburg, Brooklyn at one point. So, I mean, just kind of the ways you gather people for anything. But in that instance, I started it was like a year-long program. So I tried to get people who were really quite invested and would stick around for the whole year. And it was usually 6 to 10 people.
Yeah. So another question that came in, can you talk a little bit about how San Francisco in particular added to your experience in grad school? And do you think place matters when you're getting your MFA, is the question.
Yeah, I think it matters. I think that it's really good to have what feels like a vibrant atmosphere and arts community.
Right. And also I would say the fact that you're very specifically that you're in an arts college too.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Helped your love life, didn't it? So yeah.
I met my husband on my first day. Yeah. Yeah. So CCA gave me a lot. And we're still together to this day. And he is a working artist as well. So yeah. Let's see, what's the actual question?
Well, San Francisco, just like Litquake and all the writers coming in and out of town, the cafes in the Mission, just like
I mean, cafes in the Mission were my home. I think I lived with 5 other grad students in a big house in Noe Valley, and that was really amazing and informative. We made like studio space in the house, and me and my best friend Carmen would just sit and do our creative work in this kind of basement room together for like long hours. And being like plugging yourself into those types of situations where you are alongside other people working. This is my favorite way to make anything. This is why artist residencies are so amazing. If you can apply for all of the artist residencies possible, I would highly suggest it. Those are the places where I've gotten the best work done, gotten the deepest in my work. And to me, it's honestly because of that feeling of other people working alongside you and feeling like you're not alone. I mean, writing is the most solitary practice, and I'm a very social person. And so finding a way to have both was really important for me. And San Francisco gave that to me, and being in the arts community gave that to me. It was a really pleasant place to be, I think, for school.
You have such a great, and I talk to my students about this all the time. So students think you have to be a hermit to be a writer, and some wonder about, will they ever be able to sell themselves out in the world? And I think I probably told you this because I try to tell every student as they're going out with their books that there's the Molly who's worked incredibly hard on her work, and then there's the Molly who promotes the work of Molly. And if that second Molly isn't out doing her job, she's betraying that Molly who worked. Like, you have to have those two selves. And the fact that the other thing too that you do is, I remember when I think it was my second book was coming out, and a friend of mine who knows a lot about the book world, I said, what's the most important thing? He goes, there's just one word, or what, 2 words maybe, is to be gracious. And I think that you manage to be social, you manage to network, but in a way that always feels gracious and generous. And I'm wondering if, if you could just talk to what it takes, because I think that's a lot of what I want to instill in my students. I think we do at CCA, is how to be a good literary citizen, which you are. And what does that entail? What does that mean? Is that important to you? And what does that mean, for you?
Oh, that's such a nice idea. I've never even thought of it that way before. I love that idea of being a good literary citizen. I think I keep saying this, it's probably annoying, but like, it once again goes back to it being more about the experience of doing the thing, than like the selling yourself or your work aspect. I mean, you kind of have to do that too, but if you can find ways in which it feels authentic to you. I actually had this amazing experience with my book tour for my second book, where I went to dinner with a friend, and it was right before my book came out, and we were trying to plan the tour, like what cities would I go to and stuff. And I was like, I just don't want it to feel like it did last time, because the first time I ran up against a wall of stage fright, tons of nerves, feeling really uncomfortable in those spaces where I had to present my work. I mean, I can do the work and I can be social, but like, presenting your own work is really nerve-wracking. And I wrestled with it a lot the first time around. And then the second time around, my friend gave me this great bit of advice where she said, who do you want to talk to about your book? Who would you want to have a conversation with? Or not even about your book. Who would you want to talk about life with? Make your events with those people. So I curated this really small triad of events. And for one of them, I went on stage with my mom and we talked about my work and her work and our relationship. My book is a lot about mothers and daughters. And And another one was my best friend Carmen, who's a visual artist. And she has a very feminist oriented art practice. And we talked about life as a working artist and a mother. We talked about the female body and how it's portrayed in art. We talked about all these things that were massively interesting to me. And it didn't feel like me going up there and being like, here's my book, I'm going to read for 20 minutes, like, and this is how it goes. It's like, you are in charge of your experience as a literary citizen and as a person who is sharing. The other really amazing bit of advice I had was, you need to remember, like, instead of being afraid what people think about you while you're sharing your work, you need to actively think about it as you giving to them an experience. What do you want that experience to feel like? How do you want people to feel like held by your presence, and your gift to them is the work that you make and the way that you share it with them. And to me, that reframe was, I was able to completely change how I thought about these events.
That's such a great way to think about it. Also, I was thinking, like, the old idea of just sitting and reading, they're going to have the book, they'll read it. So to have this kind of, I mean, I remember a pretty famous writer came to Stanford and read for an hour and a half. And about the 45-minute point, there was no sense of what the audience might want from that particular moment. So I love that. And the other advice I always give, and it's true, is that you're going to have rooms packed with 100 people, and you're going to have a room with 3 people. And I said, always treat them the same, because you never know. I once had an event with 4 people, but one of the people in there, it turns out, had like 6 book clubs that were really like, but it didn't matter. It's like it was going to be a great event. I went out with everybody afterwards, and I was like, this was so fun. And someone put it on Facebook, and it's like, no, you don't. You can't have that feeling of, if you look like you're disappointed in some way because I don't know, and it sounds like there was a kind of built-in success in the way you approached that tour, that it was going to be a great evening no matter what. So
yeah. And I use that bit of advice multiple times from you. That like when there are a few people there, you treat them just the same as if there's 100.
And your mom, that's Tobias Wolff's son is a jazz musician, and they did an event together and talked about the life of a writer and a young jazz musician. It was such a great night, and some of the cross-pollination, and it was super. It was really great. We have another question. After your MFA, did you treat reading the same way? How did you go about finding the works that would deepen your learning and training in the craft of storytelling?
That's a great question. I mean, you can't undo what you learn about reading when you're a writer. It's like it's in you forever, because you'll forever be going like, how'd they do that? How'd they make that happen? Why do I feel this way right now? So you keep that with you forever. I actually often find that it's a huge gift, like books that are so good that I'm not doing that. And I'm just completely immersed. I'm like, that's good. But in terms of finding the works that deepen your learning, I'm like not the best person to ask about this, because I am what you might call like a literary dowser. I like use my divining rod when I go into the bookstore and just like feel everything out. And I truly just go to what I'm gravitating toward, not based on the cover, but based on I don't know, it's like mood or intuition, or like I kind of always find what I need, and I don't know exactly how I do that, but
that sounds like the way you said you found your material in your writing too. It's rather than the thing you're supposed to be gravitating towards, you just follow your interests in that way. So.
Yeah, follow your interest and intuition. And of course, if you love something, you can kind of triangulate around it to all the rest of their work, or the writers that inspired them, and you can do that kind of digging. But yeah, I mean, also my reading has changed so much over the years, and my preoccupations with writing have changed so much. Like during grad school, I was very interested in language and poetic use of language and wordplay, and words themselves and sounds and stuff like this. And I have just kind of veered away from that preoccupation, although I still love poetic language, but I more now gravitate toward work that feels ultra clear to me, really like clear as a bell, very strong, where the meaning is like almost on the surface rather than gilded in language.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I think should we be wrapping it up at this point, guys? So, I had to say one thing, because I feel as though I've topped all mentors with their students to have had this experience with Molly, which is I get to have, first of all, my student publish her wonderful first novel, but then the president of the college decides that my student is going to be the commencement speaker at commencement for all the grad students. And Molly flies back across the country wearing her robes, and I get to introduce her on stage at graduation. So can you talk about what that felt like? I mean, to arrive at the school, just one of all these people, not knowing how schools, and then to come back and be the commencement speaker, what that was like.
It was incredible. It was so incredible. It was like, I never would have thought I would ever get to do that in my life. And to be able to, I just have so much respect for school. I love school so much. If I could be in school for the rest of my life, I would. And
we were so disappointed that you didn't spend the rest of your life with us. So, yes.
I mean, yeah, I would still be there if I could. But to be invited back and to kind of give anything that I could back, and to talk to the students I had, some of them I worked alongside, and some of them were new, and get to have that kind of communion with the institution and with my previous professors. And it was wonderful. And and to be flown across the country is always a gift. So
yeah. Well, we definitely want you back, so we have to figure out something. Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you all the people that have tuned in and will tune in, because this will be available to be screened. And thank you, Molly, again, for joining us here. This is, I mean, it's always fun to hang out with you. So
yeah, you too. Thanks, Tom. And thank you, Jasmine, for hosting.
Thank you. This was so fantastic. I mean, talk about just a beautiful reunion here, listening to Tom and Molly. May you be friends and mentors and mentees forever. And Molly, come back and visit us. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for coming, you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.